Welcome to today's Legal Moment with Regina Sun. I'm an attorney here in Atlanta, Georgia, and today's topic is whether pregnancy should be considered a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Under the Act, a disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. It also can be defined as someone who's regarded as having an impairment or someone who has a record of an impairment. And essentially what the Americans with Disabilities Act does is protects people with disabilities either in the workplace or at public facilities or in the railroads and the like. So essentially the Congress decided to enact this statute in order that there is no discrimination against people who have a disability. Now I have here with me Latrice Roby, who is a personal health advocate for misfitsonline.org. And just the first question to start off with, Ms. Roby, is whether you think pregnancy should be considered a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
I do believe that pregnancy should be considered a disability under that act.
Well, why do you think so? Because I know, particularly as an employment lawyer, what I see often is when you're having someone who has a disability, it needs to be a little bit more permanent and not this short, transitive, very, temporary impairment that can be fixed within, a week or two. Versus, because at that point, they have to make an accommodation for just a week, which can be fairly expensive. So you think, though, with someone who's being pregnant, that's going to be a temporary type of condition, but yet an employer should accommodate that individual for the however long their pregnancy is in place.
Not the entire pregnancy, but I do feel like a pregnant woman or a mother that just had a baby should be protected in that 6-week period and be able to, that 6 to 8 week period where she's not able to work at all, in order to be able to, one, maintain her household or whatever it is, So I do feel like she should be able to apply for some type of short-term disability or whatever it may be, or maternity leave or whatever.
One important thing to remember is after someone has a baby, usually they can take federal family medical leave, which is essentially like 12 weeks off, usually unpaid, depending on your employer, to care for the birth of your child. But in this instance, what some people are saying is, look, while I'm pregnant, I have, say, a lifting restriction, or I can't do something because I get a lack of breath, or for whatever reason that is hindering me from doing the same thing my coworker could do in the same fashion. And what an employer particularly is saying, well, look, this was your job description. You can't do it, then take leave, take either your sick time off, or go ahead and start taking whatever medical leave you need to take, or just in your employment with us. So do you think that's fair, considering that they were hired to do the job that they were given to do?
I think it's very fair, because one thing that we can't stop doing is we can't stop procreating. Like, we were put here to procreate. If women stopped having babies, we wouldn't, our race wouldn't go on. So it's kind of like, that's one of those things where it has to happen. So, for an employer to say, well, now you're pregnant, so you can't do this, so you can't have this job anymore, that's kind of like, it's one of those things. Yeah, she was hired to do this particular job and she can't perform the task that is required of her at the time, but at the same time, like, what she's doing, like having a baby, has to happen. It's not something that, okay, yeah, we can avoid it, but it's really something unavoidable across the board. It's like, it has to happen.
Well, that is actually interesting that you say that, because there's one critic that some people have said against this professor who has made this argument is, look, when you're pregnant, that is a choice you make. People under the Disabilities Act, usually their impairments are something that they had no control over. Whereas here, you chose to be pregnant, you knew the consequences, and you decided to do it anyways. What do you say to those critics?
I say, what happens when when your mother wasn't able to have a child, or if she had to work with the way the economy is right now. Typically both parents have to work, but we still have to procreate. So it's like, at this point, it's like, okay, well, do I keep my job, or do I, let my family legacy, do I pass my family legacy on? So I feel like that it's not really a choice. It's like it is a choice, but it's not a choice. It's a choice, and where you can say, well, I don't want to have any children. I'm one person, I don't want to have children. But if every woman said that, we would cease to exist.
And one thing, considering your profession, can you explain exactly, because usually this may not even be a big issue. I mean, maybe there aren't many impairments that come with being pregnant, but when a woman is pregnant, does it severely hinder a lot of normal activities, or is it usually an exception that they can't do certain things that are fairly common in the workplace?
I guess it depends on what profession you have too. Like during my pregnancy, I was a personal trainer. One thing I didn't walk around and lift the 45-pound plates all the time like I typically would, just because that's something that my doctor suggested that I not do. But I was still able to perform my job tasks. I could walk around, I could talk, I could, sit down, stand up. I could pretty much do everything else but do heavy lifting. Like there's no situation where you're gonna be out of breath, or you shouldn't be, unless somebody is having a hard pregnancy, and every pregnancy is different. So you really don't, it's hard to be able to tell like what situation you might encounter with your pregnancy.
And one last thing, one thing that employers are saying is, okay, if we have to accommodate this person, it's either going to be let her not come to work because now she has this restriction and so we can't use her, and hire someone else to come in, which means I have to put someone else on my payroll with maybe another expense, or bring in an accommodation that is another expense that's only going to be there for a temporary amount of time. I mean, essentially they're saying it's expensive to have to accommodate someone, particularly if it's not going to be a permanent situation, and it's therefore not worth the expense that it takes. I mean, what do you say to an employer who pretty much just wants to keep their profit, keep their expenses the way they are, versus having to increase them in order to accommodate someone who is now pregnant?
I guess I still take the same position. Like it's something that has to happen. The only thing the employer could really do is hire all men so that they wouldn't have to worry about that issue. But that's not reality in this day and time. But I say it's one of those casualties of the business. Like, when you hire women, that X, Y, and Z can happen. This woman could get pregnant, and just like when you hire anybody, that this person can leave the company, and then you have to pay unemployment insurance. I think that brings up a good point. Maybe there should be some type of like insurance policy or something like that they can offer the women, that would be kind of like a added incentive or something like that, or something that they can add on, that where they can say, okay, if you do have to take some time off because of a pregnancy, it comes out of this money that you paid into. Because all employers don't offer like a paid maternity leave, or and you talked about leave, having the FMLA, but that's not paid.
No, it's not. It's unpaid, but you
Right.
have a job when you come back versus having no job.
True. Yeah, true. But I hold that position. I stand firm on that position. I feel like women should be at least compensated like 50% when they do have to go out on maternity leave.
So for the 12 weeks or however long, they should be paid for not working.
At least for the minimal time period. Like it's minimum like six weeks. 6 weeks for vaginal birth, and 8 weeks for a C-section. Like that's kind of standard. So I feel like they should be compensated at least, or be able to, collect their disability money, their short-term disability money or whatever for that.